So if you use an herbal that kills the parasitic worms and then they dissolve themselves, you've now released whatever was inside those nesting dolls. So there's, like I said, there could be mold, there's other infections, there's certain infections that will show up on a stool test, like D. fragilis. D. fragilis is called fragilis. It's fragile. It does not do well in a number of different environments, including on the inside of your body. So if you find D. fragilis on a GI map stool test, you have parasitic worms for sure, without a doubt, because they can't survive outside.
Robin, I am so excited to have you back here on the Healthy Skin Show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be back.
I am curious because we are going to talk again about some parasite-y type things. For those who didn't possibly see your first episode, how would you kind of describe yourself?
I am a stealth pathogen detective.
I like that.
That's what I think that's what I bring to the table, is that I'm a really good detective in that specific sets of symptoms speak things to me that I feel like other people may not catch. Like I'm good at sort of figuring out like, oh, this is a detox issue, or, oh, this sounds like this kind of imbalance versus that kind of imbalance. And sort of, I think I have good instincts about like, where is the burden and what do you do about it? How can we detect it, or do we need to detect it? So yeah.
And you don't get grossed out easily, which I appreciate about you, because some of this stuff can gross people out.
Yeah, I don't get grossed out by the things that most people get grossed out by.
We have a lot of conversations about poop, and we're like, oh yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah. And people, my clients will send me pictures of things, and my only ask is that they give me a heads up before so that it's not a surprise. I just like to be mentally prepared if I'm going to see something in your poop or like urine or something.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Just give me a heads up. Otherwise, the answer will always be yes. Send it.
So that being said, it was really interesting when we did our first episode talking about parasites, helminths, worms, and you and I both follow some very similar Instagram accounts. And there's this, I feel like parasites have become this sort of like shiny object thing in the wellness space. So, and oh gosh, for those of you, please don't go Google this. Don't look this up on Instagram because it's just going to gross you out. But there's loads of people sharing the videos, right? With the like worms crawling out of them and they're freaking out. And you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Are parasites always bad from your experience?
No. So I think this is so important to bring up because it sort of went from a big blind spot that nobody really recognized or understood. And it still is. It's a blind spot in medicine, including integrative medicine, functional medicine, certainly allopathic conventional medicine. It's just a very big blind spot. And then it became sort of like the thing du jour for the Instagram influencers. And I think it started out innocently enough where people were like, did you know that you could eat papaya seeds and it gets rid of parasites? And I would get a flood of questions of, is that true? And actually it is true. That is like a really great home remedy for parasites. And then it kind of turned into this whole like the monster within. And,
oh, goodness.
And if you have a pulse, you have parasites, which is true. If you have a pulse, you have parasites. But like, we're full of bacteria too. It's not all bad. We are more microbe than we are ourselves. And that, like, as far as cell counts go, we are more microbe than we are human. And that just speaks to the elegance and the sophistication of the human experience and the human body. We don't understand. Probably a small fraction is really what we have a pulse on. So I started to see this whole like what turned out it started with like excitement of like, oh, if you do these parasite cleanses, A, you poop out worms, which is really satisfying. And B, you feel better in XYZ way. And, you know, there's, we talked about in the first episode, there are sort of suspicious symptoms for parasitic infection. One of the things that both of us talk about is, you know, adult onset multiple allergies to either food or environment that kind of came on at once. That is a sign of parasitic infection. And then, you know, persistent symptoms, persistent constipation is a major one, these kinds of persistent symptoms. Skin issues, particularly
hives, urticaria, dermatographia, usually that's a pretty big red flag.
Yes, and cystic acne I find too is also connected.
Interesting.
I know, unusual, and I haven't quite put it together, but 100% all of the histamine related skin issues, yes, usually come back to parasites and or mold. But what ended up happening is this like almost hysteria about parasites and like where parasites come from. And I remember, so I have a dietitian friend who actually, I taught her a lot of the parasite stuff because really I feel like I kind of learned from people who were really on the fringe and sat with it for a while and then kind of like dispensed it to my little circle. But she's now treating parasites very well in her practice too. And there was an influencer who found a grub, like a grub worm in her lettuce or something like that, and put the picture on Instagram and was like, oh my God, look, this is how you get parasites, right? So-and-so. And so-and-so was like, yeah, you have to, she knows that's not a parasite, but went with it, whatever. A grub on your food is not the source of a parasitic infection. Now, snails on your food can be a vector for a parasitic infection. And I remember years and years ago when I lived in the early East Village where we had a supermarket, but the produce was terrible. So I would buy all my produce from this Chinese bodega or Korean. I think it was a Korean market, but it was a bodega. And I would always get the watercress because it's one of my favorites. And I brought the watercress home and I'm washing it and looking at it, and it is full of snails, tiny little snails. And I was like really grossed out, but I was trying not to be a baby and I didn't want to waste the food. But then at a certain point I was like, this is just too much. And I ended up just like throwing the entire bunch out the window just to land in the garden in the back. Cause I was like, okay, be free. And learned later on that there are specific types of parasites that are attached to the tiny snails. So I did myself a favor. So grubs in your lettuce and cabbage and whatever, not a source of parasites, just yucky and gross. But snails, yes, that is a problem.
Fair enough.
An infestation. So you see I think we were talking about the same person when it was sort of like, I put this banana peel under a microscope and look, there's a Helminth on it. There's like some sort of worm. Yeah. And like, oh my God, what would have happened if? And it's just too much. It's too much. So what I'd like for people to understand that I try to emphasize in my practice, but perhaps not well enough, is that yes, if you're alive, you have some parasites, just like you have bacteria, just like you have yeast. It's not anything weird. This is part of normal flora. If you get a bad one, things could go awry. Tapeworm is a perfect example. It's, vector-borne or food-borne or whatever, however you get it. It's all gross. And it's tapeworms is pretty much always bad. But could you survive and thrive with like a tiny bit of tapeworm in your gut? I don't know, maybe. But to then extend it all to all worms, all helminths, now you've missed the plot, because there's some actually very interesting science where certain types of helminths they're using to rebalance the immune system in autoimmune and allergies. So
I know, which I find fascinating.
They're not all bad.
They're not all bad.
it doesn't matter until it matters. Like you might have some parasites in the gut. It's going to be fine. But it's that one burden is usually not going to be enough to tip you into illness or imbalance.
This episode is brought to you by my skincare line, DermaQuell. The beauty of these skincare products are that they are especially crafted for those struggling with chronic skin rash issues based on my research and clinical experience from my private practice. They focus on organic ingredients that are clean like zinc, aloe, and hemp oil that support and calm rashed, dry, angry skin. There's no unnecessary chemicals or additives that can further dry out your skin or mess with your hormones. And I'm so excited for you to add these creams into your routine. Check them out at quellshop.com and use the coupon code GET15OFF to get 15% off your first order. I'll put a link in the description below. And now let's jump back to the video. And I think what is helpful for people to know, especially if they're like, wait, I could use a Helminth or a worm to treat my allergies.
Maybe.
Maybe. Right? Because you're not going to end up with like the things that they generally test for. My understanding is that there's very specific types of Helminths, am I correct in saying that can be helpful in rebalancing I think would they say it's the Th1 to the Th2 side of the immune system, I suppose, for the allergy
That's what
help.
they said. Yeah. And also I wonder if it's just like intestinal barrier integrity, really. And that's why, like, we know that the gut likes diversity, like diverse types of microbes, diverse types of fiber and antioxidants and things like that. So it's very diverse in there. But yeah, you can't just like pick whatever Helminth. It has to be really specific.
Right. You don't want to go around and be like, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Yeah. You look good. Let me ingest you.
And where would one even get that? I don't know that either.
Apparently, according to some very big Instagram accounts, you could pick them up anywhere, on anything, in anything, all the time.
Oh. I mean, the ones that you want?
No, but I'm just saying in general. General, you could just pick up parasites. And to be fair, I think, like you said, there's some truth to it, but it's been turned into a 5-alarm fire at this point.
Yeah. So is it true that, like, it is true that people come through both of our practices and that they need some intense rebalancing from intestinal parasites that have been there for a long time. I saw somebody yesterday. She has chronically low level iron, and she'll get an infusion and she'll take supplements and all that stuff, but she can't hold it at a good level. And there's she has no GI bleed. They ruled that out. Her periods are not heavy, so that's ruled out. She's not vegan or vegetarian. She's getting iron. So that is highly suspicious for parasitic infections. So, and you might want to do a little cleanup. Like I can't remember if it's South Africa or Australia or both, perhaps, but certainly some of the South American countries do this too, Colombia being one of them, where at the end of the season being the summer, when you're outside, your kids are outside, everybody does a parasite cleanse, and they use whatever herbs that they use traditionally, but they do a parasite cleanse on kids and sometimes adults at the end of the summer, just to kind of like rebalance. So that might be a good idea, but the fear and obsession of like, we must sterilize everything because maybe there's a parasite on it, like the banana peel, that's a little much.
Well, and the other thing too that I get worried about, and listen, my clinic works with a lot of people because I have other associates, and obviously you've worked with a ton of people. I feel like one of the challenges when I'm like, hey, look, the testing is showing you have a Helminth infection or a protozoa or both sometimes, or I suspect it because of X, Y, and Z. A lot of times they're like, well, how do we deal with it? And I'm like, hold on. Don't freak
out.
Right.
It's
don't
okay.
freak out. But also, let's not just jump into how do we get rid of this, because we have to consider the full picture. So what's your sense on that? Is it like, oh, you got a parasite, let's deal with that despite everything else that's going on? Or do you feel like it has to be really like a 2,000-foot view to then figure out what's the best way forward?
I think it also depends on the type of microbe that comes through. If it's something that's like on the pathogen page of a GI map, you have to deal with that always immediately, because that's setting everything else on fire. But to your point, and to me, it always really matters on the overall health of the person. Are they quite fragile and unwell, or are they robust and they feel really good? Are their symptoms really specific to the gut and digestive system, or is it something that's more global that's affecting other organ systems? And so that's kind of what you have to think about. Because you do also hear, I'm sure you've heard this too, you hear a lot of stories about people who buy whatever, program online, and they jump right into a parasite cleanse, and maybe it's missing a piece. Like some of the parasite cleanses, I think more of them now talk about binders and the importance of binders, but plenty of times people jump into like a 10-day parasite cleanse, no binders. They feel wretched the whole time. And when you feel wretched like that, that's also a cascade of inflammation. So yeah, you're probably you're getting rid of parasites and infections, and that's why you feel so bad, but you're exceeding your body's capacity to detox the toxins that are related to that. And now you're having a die-off response. Now you're having a big detox for Herxheimer response. So for many people, you have to go through very specific steps. The first step is they have to be pooping. So you never want to kill anything in the gut that cannot get out. And the biggest exit strategies are going to be poop and pee and sweat. And if you aren't pooping, then you're just going to like wake up beasts, and they're going to have nowhere to go, and you're going to feel really bad. So don't do that.
You're stewing in the pot.
Oh yeah, it's so
waste
bad.
And toxins. Yeah, it's not good.
Yeah, and if you're in the health arena, you've done this to yourself inadvertently too before. I mean, there was a time before I knew about binders. So we didn't know. We're learning as we go also. So there's, the binders are a very important part to make sure that you can mop up toxins. You have to be pooping every single day at least once. You also don't want to treat somebody who's having chronic diarrhea with anything aggressive, because it might just get worse. So you have to manage that first. You have to be hydrating. So you have to be hydrated and well hydrated. That is also a non-negotiable, but also you have to consider some people don't have good lymphatic drainage and their lymph is mucky, and that's an important detox pathway. So sometimes you have to do a whole pre-tox first before you even try to do anything that supports detox or killing off infections. And if you're doing this on your own, or you're working with a practitioner who hasn't made all of these connections together, there is no organ system that functions alone. It's one whole system. So you have to be mindful of what's the health of the cell? What's the cell membranes doing? What's the integrity of the gut? Is your immune system super pissed off, or is it very suppressed? Because you're going to have a different plan based on that. So I wish that there was one path that we could send people on, but a lot of it really does depend. You can get away with more if you're robust and very healthy. But usually the people who are looking to these sorts of
products,
protocols, these protocols are really suffering.
Yeah.
So you hate to see somebody suffer more because things were not done in the proper order, or they weren't protected well enough from just die off.
And Robin, I'll actually share. So I have told people for a long time, be very careful, even though a lot of practitioners will market these kits online to do, a certain time of the month or whatever. I'm be very careful, because my experience has been that oftentimes, because I work with people who are ill, let's be honest, that's who my folks are. They're not these healthy, robust individuals. They have a lot of skin issues, they have gut issues. A lot of times they have other things going on. And so I always tell them, go slow, slowly introduce products. And if you hit a point where you're like, ooh, I don't feel good past this point, then you don't push it. We shouldn't. It's weird how we're in this industry of like trying to make ourselves well, but somehow there's this like, I'll just make myself really sick so I can get better sooner,
Yeah.
which doesn't make any sense. So anyway, this person decided she got one of these kits on her own. I had forewarned, she'd listened to all of the classes that she was in with me, and I'd forewarned people, like, if you decide to go down this route, please go slow, use a binder, et cetera, et cetera. Well, she did 2 days at like the lowest thing and was like, you know what, I feel fine. I'm just going to dive in. I'm going to do the full doses. So she had psoriasis and so on her own, she decided to do this. Within a day, she had such a severe full body histamine reaction to
exploded.
It exploded. She had to go to the hospital because of how bad this was. And she wrote us to be like, I deeply, deeply regret not listening to Jen about this. I am really suffering. They've given me antihistamines and basically said you just have to wait for this to calm down. And we offered some other assistance to try to help her like get things a bit under control. But I appreciate everyone wanting to DIY things, but there's a lot of folks who have done things on their own that are probably not the best advice for other people to follow. And it's hard to know what's safe to do and what's not. But I think this was one big example of why you have to go slow. As you said, you got to get things lined up because it can backfire. And you can end up feeling way, way worse and unleashing things that you did not mean or intend or want to happen. So that being said, about like just thinking about parasites, you had this really interesting analogy of how to think about them.
Oh, yeah. So the way that it was presented to me many, many years ago, and like I said, I learned on the fringes. The first practice that I worked at, they were really on the fringes of medicine. And so I learned some really cool things that every so often I'll go to a conference and they'll talk about the things that we were doing then. And as it was like new and they're like, oh my God, can you believe this? And I'm like, wow, we were doing that like a solid 15 years ago. I sort of didn't appreciate it, that it was like so far ahead, but we were definitely talking about things that nobody else was talking about. But I got to learn some really great things from very cool practitioners. The way that it was presented to me was the idea of Russian nesting dolls, where, and this goes back to like the parasites are actually also there for a reason. The parasites serve their purpose too in your body. It's not just infection. And of course, this is not the case this is not the case with like pinworms. This is not the case with a tapeworm. Like those are infections. This is the case with the miscellaneous nematodes and helminths and other kinds of worms that we're really at our beginning of understanding exactly who are good guys, who are bad guys, how much is too much, and like whatever. So that's the disclaimer. But the idea is that the parasites are there to clean something up for you. So if you have a big mold exposure, you also have parasites. And the parasites the population might have gotten out of control because now they have too much to feed on. But the parasites are there to kind of like Pac-Man gobble up the toxins, the yeast, the mold, the Lyme, and all of these other infections, which is another reason why you don't want to go in with parasite killers all at once, because when you kill them and they dissolve themselves, which if you listen to our first episode, you'll know that when parasites die, they disintegrate. So you can't find a dead parasite on a stool test, which is one of the reasons why they're so hard to find. So if you use an herbal that kills the parasitic worms and then they dissolve themselves, you've now released whatever was inside those nesting dolls. So like I said, there could be mold, there's other infections, there's certain infections that that will show up on a stool test, like D. fragilis. D. fragilis is called fragilis. It's fragile. It does not do well in a number of different environments, including on the inside of your body. So if you find D. fragilis on a GI map stool test, you have parasitic worms.
Yep.
For sure, without a doubt, because they can't survive outside.
And there's a high likelihood you have H. pylori too. So it's interesting how they all are kind of, there's like friends.
They're friends. They're symbiotic together too. And so it's this idea of like, not all the parasites are bad. Why are they there? And then when you kind of get deep into this kind of work and you're doing parasitic, I mean, for lack of a better term, cleanses, we do like pulses and we really like move things out, and people are pooping out worms and stuff. And at a certain point, you're just sort of like, how long are we going to be doing this? And sometimes I don't know. But when it's very, very persistent and you're doing, herbs and herbs and herbs, and it seems that the parasites are never ending, then you have to start thinking about, well, what is the situation in this particular body that allows for them to stay? Is there a toxin there that they are feeding off of, but also shielding you from? They're not all bad, and they're not always doing something bad for you. It initially might start as something that's helpful to protect you from toxins and other infections, but then it gets out of hand because there's so much toxin and infection that then there's too much for them to feed on. And now it's an imbalance. And that's why sometimes when people are sort of like, does it always matter? If you have a pulse, you have parasites. Yes, that's true, because it's probably part of normal flora, but it doesn't always matter until it matters. So they're fine to stay in there, most likely, as long as they're not triggering big symptoms and throwing off the balance of your body. The population is low, because eradication is not possible. There's no eradication of anything in the body, really. It just becomes part of the microbial universe in there.
You're trying to like balance your immune system function, right?
Yeah,
with like
it's balance.
Where can your immune system tolerate and handle and kind of keep things in check?
Yeah.
And what's too much?
Right. And what is enough? You also have to be able to like keep your own nutrient status and not have too many things feeding on you and eating up your vitamins and, like taking your iron and,
all that good stuff.
All of that.
Well,
doesn't paint a pretty picture.
The other interesting thing, I've been reading a lot recently about biofilms, and what's fascinating, there's different types of biofilms. So biofilms are basically like these protective, we'll just call them shields, that help organisms not get impacted by whatever the treatment is. So it could be medications, could be herbs even. And so some bacterial biofilms can actually include protozoa, so they can hide behind those biofilms. And then I know with fungus, that can also hide biofilms. I've definitely seen in multiple clients where they've got a huge fungal problem and you're working on the fungal issue, they're getting better, we're seeing good results, and then all of a sudden they have this like huge hive flare up, and they never had hives before, and we're like, we
busted a
something.
biofilm. It's always good though. You busted through a biofilm and stuff came out.
Yep.
So,
and now you're like, all right, we know we're at the next onion peel level, right?
Yeah.
So we're peeling back the layers in a smart fashion, intelligent. Like that's why I think part of it has to be is we have to give our bodies grace and meet them where they are. Like that's what I hear you saying. And like, you have to be pooping, you have to be moving things along. You have to balance these other systems so they can handle what you're doing. And if you're going to then throw everything into chaos just because you want to get it done in like 2 weeks or whatever it is.
Yeah, your
like
body doesn't care about your timeline.
No.
That's sort of the thing. People want to know a timeline, and I don't blame them. And I wish that I had an answer for things like timeline, but you never really know until you start going in how sensitive somebody is, how many layers there are. You know, what if there's a whole different root cause? We thought that it was this thing, but there was actually something else underneath it. You can't always anticipate these things, but your body sets the pace and your body sets the rules. And so, you know, it behooves you to respect the body's own timeline, which sometimes we're just not privy to.
Yeah. And it can be really annoying and frustrating for somebody that like just wants to get it done. Like,
yeah,
it's a deep lesson in having patience, unfortunately.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I did want to ask one last question, because I've talked about pinworms on the show with Jen Brand, because she works with kids. And so she sees pinworms a lot, and they're contagious.
Yeah.
Those little kids, they don't realize they're passing that back and forth.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on worms being contagious? So helminths being contagious more in general. So if, say, say you actually have like a tapeworm or some other thing, like what is the likelihood, or what have you seen clinically in terms of people passing the parasites back and forth within their family or between partners or with the kids? Pinworms are highly passable.
Very contagious.
Yes.
Pinworms are very contagious. You know, it's interesting because you really do share a microbiome with everyone who's living in your household, including your pets, which is interesting. And you'll see it has happened so many times. Somebody gets a puppy has Giardia. And then you have stomach issues, but you go to the doctor and Giardia doesn't show up. It just doesn't show up on the O&P. And you kind of have this like low grade digestive dysfunction until someone runs a better, more sensitive test, finds the Giardia and treats it. And then they're like, oh my God, yeah, I got a puppy and the puppy got Giardia or whatever. So we're sharing our microbiome also with our partners too, our kids and our partners. Now, pinworm is sort of in a category to itself, I think, where everybody has to get treated. Everybody in the house gets treated. All the kids get treated. If you can convince the vet to treat the dog or the cats, like treat everyone. And then you get something like OxyClean, something similar to OxyClean, that category. And you put that in the wash. You have to change the sheets a million times, the towels every day, vacuum all the time. You have to be kind of like a psycho about it with pinworms. With other things, it's sort of, you kind of have to see. In my experience with tapeworms, I have not seen that carry on to partners or other people in the household. It doesn't seem like something that is so easily spread, though I'm sure that is possible. But when I'm dealing with a deep-seated gut infection that I think includes parasites, I will often suggest that the partners also do a little bit of something, especially if we're doing, did we talk about full moon and new moon last time?
I think a little bit.
Okay, so parasites are more active around the full moon and the new moon. It seems very witchy, but it's sort of like our serotonin levels are up and down and they feed on serotonin. I mean, if you think about the tide, the pull of the tide from the moon, how the moon affects a lot of things. We're just sort of cut off from nature in a way sometimes where we don't recognize it. But I do sometimes pulsing of my antiparasitic herbs around the new moon and the full moon just to kind of shake extra things out. And so when we're doing that and we have an open-minded partner, or we have a partner who maybe doesn't feel tip top, they're not as bad, but they don't feel tip top. I'll sort of, if I think that they're medically appropriate, we'll give them a little bit of antiparasitic herb on those days too. Because I mean, even now I see a couple, and I see them separately. Husband had all the symptoms, really struggled, lots of weight loss unintended, like he was just withering away. So we dealt with him efficiently. And then his wife was kind of like, actually, I don't feel that good. And I'm very constipated and I've never been constipated in my life. And so, okay, come, we'll deal with you. And so now that the husband is really he's on the mend, he is almost done, I think. And the wife is in the thick of it. And so husband asked, rightly so, do you think that there's a chance that I can get it again from her? And the answer is, yeah, there is. So when we pulse her, we're going to keep him on something and we'll figure that out. But I do that sometimes with fungal infections too.
Yep.
Where we'll give the partner a little bit of something, or maybe even a topical spray, like a tea tree topical spray to the junk. Just be careful of your urethra because it will burn.
Oh.
But, you give somebody a little bit of like an antimicrobial just to make sure that they're not passing things along. We know that H. pylori gets passed on like that. I very much suspect, I'm curious to know your opinion, I think oral microbiome imbalances are also shared with partners, where you'll have one partner who like has never had a cavity, and then they get into a relationship with someone who only gets cavities,
100%.
and then they start getting cavities. So
100%.
we have to think about all of the different microbial worlds that we have. The oral one, we have one in our nasal passages, definitely the gut, we have skin microbiomes, and they're not fixed. They're fluid.
They are very fluid. I mean, we even now know that we have a totally separate microbiome in our gallbladder. I mean, it's like wild how many microbiomes. They're in the eye. I mean, it's just like, it's wild.
Yeah.
We are amazing. We are constantly learning. I love it.
It's a whole planet. It's like each person's body is like an entire planet filled with microorganisms. Which sounds undesirable, but the whole idea is symbiotic. It's symbiosis. And these kinds of gut infections, all these things are just showing that, we tip the scales in not our favor, and then we have to tip them back in our favor, and then live in a way that tries to maintain that balance.
Yeah. Well, I will say that I consider you to be one of my favorite people to dive into this stuff with, because
that's so nice.
I think for like my community, they know I'm like just a deeply curious person, and I love learning about this stuff. I love thinking about it. And like you, it's like, so I don't know. I don't find it gross. I mean, there's a moment when like it comes to me eating food, and had I seen a video on somebody's Instagram with a worm coming out that
when it's fish.
I know.
Like the salmon ones.
Yeah, the salmon one.
But I already knew that, and like really have forbade any. I mean, really, like sushi is a risk. Sushi's a risk, unfortunately. But salmon sushi, bigger risk.
What if it's cooked though? The cooked
less risk.
So so if you're doing sushi and you do like I think it's a California roll. Is it cooked?
It is cooked. It's like I think that's fake crab. I don't even think that's real crab. A lot of times it's fake crab. Which
I see, I don't eat sushi.
I miss sushi so much. Whenever I go out of town, my partner goes for sushi.
He's like, I'll take the worms. It's okay.
He's got an iron gut, but I will say that his gut was less than iron after getting with me, and I feel very responsible because you become an expert in the things that you struggle with personally, and that's sort of like usually how it goes. Yeah. And so there were times where I would sort of look at him and was like, you've never had indigestion in your life until now, haven't you?
Me.
And so we had to, but he also gets the benefit of my protocol. So
that is true.
He's good now.
That is true. Well, I want to thank you again for coming back. I really appreciate you for being here and sharing additional nuanced perspective, right? So like we can take the 5-alarm fire down.
Don't panic. You don't have to panic. You can find help. There are experts out there who can help you.
Yes.
Try not to go at it alone unless you are in robust health and you're just curious. That's okay. We can experiment with our bodies, but really partner with an expert so that you know the order in which to do things, for how long do you do it. It's good to have educated help.
It is. And Robin, if people who are seeing this episode, either you're listening or you're watching, if they want to connect with you, what is the best way to reach you?
You can find me on Instagram, foroutan.nutrition. Or you can find me on my website, which is nutritionbyrobin.com. And that's Robin with an I, because there is a Robin with a Y.
Correct.
But that's not me.
Well, we'll make sure to put all of your links and everything in the show notes so people can find you, as well as the previous episode. That way, if they're like, oh, I need to hear what we said the first time, they can easily do that.
That was a good episode.
It was. And I just thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. It was fun to chat with you.
If you enjoyed this video, you need to tune in to this video next. Then make sure to hit the subscribe button so you get notified as soon as a new episode drops. I'm excited to see you there and dive deeper with you on your skin healing journey.